share with us what you were involved with in the early 70s with Bill?
Yeah, happily.
Daniel?
For me, I had known Bill for years, and but had no sense of what his involvement was with the energy business that we were talking about. I met Bill's father several times, who was a very charismatic guy and a very intense gentleman. I was introduced to him and then to Iueana Thomasa in the hopes that we might make a film together. I was a young, idealistic filmmaker at the time and really was knocked out by the potential of the material that was presented to me. And it took me a while to digest it, but very quickly I became passionate about it and felt that it needed to be done, this story needed to be told. And I was delighted that I had the opportunity to tell the story, at least under Iueana Thomas's supervision, because he was not giving it away by any stretch. So yeah, that's how I came to meet the group. And Bill's father, who Bill Doyle Sr., was a most remarkable guy, and as I said, intense in the kind of way that geniuses are, or chess players are, or something, and it was a little intimidating. Iueana was completely the opposite. He was very gregarious, very Welsh gentleman with that lovely Welsh accent, but when he spoke, every word had weight. He really made his points, and it didn't take me long to realize that this was somebody special. And I, again, wanted to tell his story. So that's kind of how I came to it.
How long had you known the Doyles prior to making the movie?
Probably 3 or 4 years. And in those days, when you're young, that's a long time. Yeah. You know, I had met Bill's father sporadically, but Bill, we had some social encounters and got to be good friends and trust each other. And I guess that's why I was introduced to, firstly, his father, and then Iueana secondly, is that we'd established this kind of rapport. Because this was a family secret, you know, really. So I was quite amazed at the scope of it. And I had no idea who Bill's father was in the intelligence community. So I learned perhaps more than I should have about who I was dealing with. And for a kid, it was pretty amazing. I mean, I was honored, flattered, intimidated, and motivated all at the same time. So that's kind of how I came to be there.
So whose idea was the movie then?
I think it was collaborative. I think it was a synthesis of the frustration of the family and Iueana himself, who had been gradually marginalized by all the powers that be, as described in Bill's interview, and also by Bill's father's utter and complete faith in the mechanism, the magic of this machine, and from my point of view, the potential for the good that this could bring to a world that was just beginning to talk about things like energy crisis, like, you know, and beginning to understand about global warming. The Club of Rome, MIT, had just published its report. And I remember digesting that, and I thought, God almighty, you know, here we have this theoretical solution, and there's a very real problem, so somebody better talk about it. It was probably much like you do. You know, I felt it was immediately, urgently necessary that people hear about this.
Okay, so I guess Bill Doyle Sr. put up the money for it?
No, I put up the money.
You put up
Yeah.
the money.
I had a reasonably successful career at that point, and again, being young and foolish, money was never something I worried about. So I begged, borrowed, stole, conscripted. We got our own flatbed editing machine. We brought up to the farm where I was living. We did it guerrilla style, but I borrowed the equipment, and we talked. I think it was York University into giving us their one of their auditoriums. We were able to convince Austin Willis, the spokesperson, who was at that point a big deal in Canadian broadcasting. Our passionate conviction, I guess, infected him, and he took time out of his life for no fee to come up and be, you know, pampered and dealt with. And so it was, yeah, I mean, it was my own money. Any money that was spent was my own money, and I was happy to do so.
how did you kind of do a rough run through with Ian to start off with, like what topics would be covered, what wouldn't be, or how
Yeah, yeah.
well, yeah.
Ian was very careful, as were the Doyle family, as to what they would divulge and what they wouldn't divulge. But it was my intention to make sure that the film had enough so what, enough punch to make it memorable and to cut through the clutter of what could be considered lunatic claims and you know, ridiculous whatever technology. So we scripted initially some outlines, ran them by Ian to make sure that it was correct, and so that we weren't putting words in anybody's mouth, particularly Ian's. He was very, very careful about what he said, and as you can see in his film, is very structured in his speech, and you know he is being utterly clear when he is making a point, you know.
We must keep in mind here that we are not dealing merely with a new invention. Our discovery represents a new view of the universe and our place in it. A scientific theory basically is a set of premises which seeks to explain a certain set of data. Now, if the data is brought to light or found or discovered which contradicts that theory, we change the theory, not the data. Unfortunately for us, the second law has provided such a far-reaching base of technological development over the years that data contrary to it is actually legislated against.
We did some run-throughs with Ian, and in the course of that, it became clear what he was comfortable saying and not saying. And similarly, then, and from that, we were able to give Austin Willis some asking questions, some points to motivate Ian in the direction. And we did some rudimentary, goofy animation, given the understanding that I pulled in a friend of mine who was an animation student to do these goofy animations, based on Ian's minimal description of what was going on. So yeah, we did run-throughs, but we tried to keep it not too scripty. Much like you do with your stuff, I think it's better to have too much stuff and edit it down than just try to get verbatim a read. So I think it's a very honest document of a time. You know, we tried to scare the viewers a little bit with the, you know, the traffic jams and the nuclear, you know, whatever. And it's a bit naive and goofy, but I think for the time, we conveyed the message that there is a problem and this may be the solution. I was particularly happy with the ending of it, where Ian looks into the camera and makes this sort of soul-searchingly emphatic statement about, don't let anyone take this away from you. You know, this is your legacy, meaning the people of the earth, in a sense. You know, I thought that was maybe the strongest statement I've ever seen from Ian, and it affected me. It was powerful. It still affects me.
I do indeed feel humble in the presence of what I have seen and sensed and measured and felt. However, in this instance, there is no single invention, but rather a major breakthrough, from which will flow a whole generation of inventions, each of which will affect the life of every viewer, and for that matter, every non-viewer as well. This breakthrough ultimately obsoletes all current sources of energy and all appliances now in use. Pollution is surely a thing of the past. Space travel becomes a practical reality. With free energy, man becomes the master of his own destiny. It is now incumbent upon all of us, and I fully realize myself in particular, to see that the results of this breakthrough be made available to free men everywhere, in such a way as to not completely dislocate our economies. In this regard, I will need all the help I can muster. I am determined to work with all men of goodwill for the betterment of all. And I invite the major manufacturing institutions to join with us in establishing appropriate research and development programs, to join with us in making available to the public an early generation of consumer products based on our breakthrough, and to continue in association with us to the point where all men may have available to them this new bounty of science. I say to you, the people of this audience, I am extending the prospect of the infinitive concept to you, to your children, and your children's children. Let no group, however constituted, withhold it from your grasp.
Yeah. Did you have to cut that much out of it, or was it
Not
pretty
no,
much on where it went where you really wanted to?
Yeah, we were trying to keep it within the framework of the 1 hour,
Yeah.
and so we were pretty careful about and I had a friend of mine who was a producer at the CBC at the time, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So we were looking to get an airing of it and tried to make it not too either all pro or all con. We tried to give it balance so that they would air it. So we did work to a final time. It wasn't open-ended, and we were able to, I think, stay on target pretty much. So yeah, there wasn't a lot on the editing room floor, if that's what you're asking.
Was it ever aired?
I think we had one airing, did we not, Bill?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I got paid, the CBC, bless their hearts, because I was not an in-house producer. They don't want to encourage, in those days, anyone outside producing, so they paid me the barest minimum, which sort of covered, beer and chips, and that was about it. But
So CBC did it?
they did air it. Their complaint, to take it further, was that it was skewed heavily in the believing that this is real versus playing the pro-con journalist approach. So, but they still did air it, and yeah, that was, probably about a year after we made it, eh, Bill?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be, I'm guessing 72, maybe 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it when they aired it? Was it prime time or late night, 3 o'clock in the morning, or?
I honestly don't
Yeah.
remember. I do know the producer's name was Rena Crow.
Vanya.
Thank you. Very good. She's still around? No. Okay.
I sold her a film.
Okay. Well, there we go. That's the cameraman speaking. Yeah, and she was great. She put aside and sort of fought for us a little bit as independent filmmakers, because the CBC likes to internalize everything, as I said before. At least they used to.
Yeah.
So beyond that, as I say, the film, to my eyes now, is quite naive, but it's extremely honest, almost painfully so. And we were very, very careful to represent Ian and all things related as honestly and objectively as I could, knowing what I knew. Not being an engineer or a scientist, I was just, trying to save the world, I guess, at the
No,
time.
it's a nice piece. It's good. It's a good piece. Did you hang out much with Ian? I mean, what kind of guy was he? I mean,
He was great. He was great. He was a one of these guys that, how can I describe it? He was dying to be low key, but he just could not mask his inner intensity. So he'd sit with you and casually try to be casual, but he was awkwardly casual. He really wanted to get to the nuts of any discussion. He wanted to impart so much information to me as a complete novice to the whole subject. So he would start out by finding out, did I understand the concept of gravity, or whatever it might be, before he would launch into anti-gravity, certainly, or even magnetic anything, or closed circuits, all the things that have now come to be discussed openly by you guys. And so he kind of accepted the fact that I was going to make the film initially, and then tried to tutor me just enough to give me sense of what was going on in his mind. And the more I hung out with him, and he liked to have a cocktail, he liked to, he was a kind of a rascally sort of character, really. But, I remember sitting, I guess it was in Gordon Riley's place, was it? That big old mansion where he was living? And in the kitchen of, I guess, the servants' quarters. This was a tremendously over-the-top place that Ian was living. and just having kind of tea and crackers or tea and cookies with this scary genius. Amazing, intense.
The genius aspect shone through, did it?
Oh man, well, as I say, he was dying to be low-key and conversational and casual. He'd unbutton a button to try to be, everyman. But he was dyed-in-the-wool engineering, British, tight, crisp. If you asked him a question, you better be ready for the answer, because he would give it to you in chapter and verse.
Like drinking from a fire hose.
Kind of thing, yeah. And for me, it was, whoa, take it easy. But I loved it. I was energized. I couldn't believe who this guy was and how much kind of internal fortitude, imagination, humor. But I could feel the pain in him as he had been abused. It had cost him family. It had cost him financially, and I think self-respect-wise. He had been beaten up by the time I met him.
Pretty sad.
But I did get to really love the guy, and he was a great character.
Did you get to meet any of the Bert England or Tom Tolls?
I interviewed Jack Long from Dunham Bush,
Right.
who was the one of the refrigeration contributors to that thing, and I did meet one other guy, and I'm trying to think who it was. One of the engineers. He joked with me about did I know what an engineer's breakfast was, and I said I didn't, and he told me that it was vodka and cornflakes. That was their sort of, apparently engineering-wise, that's what these guys do or did in those days. Very much like Mad Men. It was that era, of funny carryings on. I don't remember who that was, Bill. There was Bert England, or no, it wasn't Bert. Anyway, I did interview Jack Long, who was very emphatic. Ralph Long, thank you, Ralph Long, who was very emphatic that not only everything that Ian had said and claimed, but that far more than we know was going on, and he had no reason to say that. At that point, I think he was retired. He was a senior guy. There was no interest for him at all to falsify or embellish anything. He was quite passionate also about Ian's and his company's discoveries and what could come of it.
Being critical of their claims, I was invited to personally conduct a test of their system, which I did in July of 1970 using my instruments. I was again invited to see the system in 1971 and noted several modifications had been made in the equipment, which had been in operation for several hours before my arrival. I noted one component of the closed system heavily frosted, and also noted the suction pressure was at 70 pounds pressure, or a corresponding temperature of 37.9 degree Fahrenheit. And as ice forms at 32 degree Fahrenheit, this condition was impossible. The temperature at the frosted component, incidentally, was minus 40 degree Fahrenheit. The foregoing, plus my lifelong experience in this industry, proves existing refrigeration systems are obsolete.
Ted Rattray embraced me as the oldest son of the financer behind this thing, and he started it on me and said, you're going to be a very rich man one day. He pumped my hand. He wouldn't let it go. He had a drink in the other hand. By the time this day was over, I had seen what my father was talking about, corporate madness. Instead of slowly easing into this was all laid on him. He came up, he'd heard these fantastic results of a COP of 150,000, which is what the Langenheim-Kaiser report said. However, he had read the Kaiser-Langenheim report, and he had read the reports, the official reports, which said, oh no, you can't do this. Whatever the readings are, they're a mistake, and you have to change those numbers to fit our outdated, broken, false model. You cannot tell us what it's actually doing here, because that's not allowed according to the second law of thermodynamics. And if you violate the second law, you're Satan. And I was young and I didn't understand the importance of all of this. My father understood it, and Ian. Well, I'm going to get into Ian in a second, but let me finish this train of thought for you. So Ted Rattray told me that you and your father, you're going to be as big as Mr. Morgan and Mr. Rockefeller one day. He was not saying this to me to make me feel good. He was saying this to be one of the first few bureaucrats to make sure that I noticed him, so that because he was a cat that wanted to get more milk and cookies on the floor, and he wanted to be petted and he wanted to be loved, because he was sure that this is not the kind of person that was given to hyperbole. But he had been down there at that test where David Cameron came, the top engineer in Canada, and a bunch of the others, and they had gone through there and saw how the hot and the cold were almost touching, and saw that the frosted over component was at minus 40, which is very unusual, and that everything seemed to be running backwards, and that the Brummel strum of atoms was going on real good. I mean, it was, the machine's like it has St. Vitus dance. It's bolted down very tightly to the floor, so it wouldn't bounce around, because there was a lot of shaking. And once it got shaking, it shook most violently when it was being initiated. After it found the hysteresis, the collapsing point of gas, when the gas got to an equilibrium state, it settled down, and after a while you didn't notice it so much. But Ray was new, and he noticed all these things. And when he saw the numbers and saw the engineers that were supplying the numbers, these were independent reports not generated by Designex. My father paid for this. I know the millions it cost to year after year after year after year after year for 8 years in a row. After the official funding had all stopped from the government and Designex wasn't doing projects, they didn't have profits to plow back into this. We knew what the price of the pain was. But the reward, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, was very attractive, and rational people were saying, you've done it. It's all going to happen. So, of course, I have never been one to say I can walk on water when it isn't frozen, but it was nice to go back home and have that feeling of confidence that finally it was one of those rare affirmative meetings.
Did you ever get to see any bits and pieces of the hardware?
Ian showed me a kind of a little model-y thing one time that he had, and it was mostly copper piping, and it was, I guess, like a bit of a maquette. And again, it may have been there for the benefit of me, the imbecile, to help me visualize, what they were up to. And he did show me on one occasion a report from an independent engineering firm, and I can't remember who they were. But it outlined the fact that they had tested certain things and there was numbers in and numbers out. And to the best of their knowledge, this was not possible in the known universe, or something to that extent. And it was again, Ian was very proud of this, showing me how absurdly the authorities responded to what was potentially a huge breakthrough. I mean,
And you were how old, would you say, at the time, give or take?
49, 59, 69. Plus 4 years, so 23, roughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get to tour the Designex facilities at all? Or
It had been mothballed. No, that had all been mothballed at that point. I came into this. I think that was happening in the 60s and even probably the 50s. So at that point, Ian, I believe his family had sort of crumbled around him from all the stress of this. He had lost his security, and realizing what a monstrous operation he was running, it was quite sad to see a guy of this caliber who'd designed transmissions for ocean liners and built things for the Battle of Britain, and a really important guy reduced to.
He did quite a bit of tremendous work during World War II, didn't he?
Right.
What was he doing?
I'm not sure, but I do know there was some steam technology involved, and I believe he was in the aircraft industry helping the Brits, as well as, all the covert stuff, which, I'm just hearing about mostly now, a lot of it,
What the public does not know, and what I'm saying to you now, which I've said to you in private, is without a doubt, absolutely, it is irrevocably 100% true that an American who had done work in England called Thomas Townsend Brown was the actual project director for the two types of saucers that were being built at A.V.Roe that had nothing to do with the VZ-9 air car, other than that they were brown disc-shaped. One of them was the Mythe Beluzzo saucer, which was at least as big around as the interior of this house.
That would be what, 30 foot?
Oh, whoa, 60 feet. It would be a lot bigger than this. It filled up the whole bay, and then, but that wasn't the big project. The real
That was brought over from Germany?
No, that was,
Built?
they built a new one from Germany. They got Meith. Meith was a fuels wizard. And he had come up with a chemical fuel process that they used in the, perhaps you've seen photos of the Nazi bell-shaped saucer?
Yeah.
The chemical fuel in there, I remember Jan commenting to me that you could always tell the Germans that were there because they put an awful lot of hydrogen peroxide in the fuel. Now, I don't know about fuel mixes, but Jan certainly did because one of his employees, they had special projects there. And the first special project that they had at Designex that began in 1953 or 4, they called Private Venture Project Solid Fuels. And there were always very truncated names like that. They all started off with PV. The private venture meant that they were empowered by through their exclusive relationship with A.V.Roe to research, develop, do everything that they could to try and come up with a solid fuels. They were looking for a solid fuels for to fire missiles from submerged and underway submarines, which was totally impossible at the time. They couldn't fire anything without liquid oxygen. And they had I remember him, I met him. This chemist was not from England. I believe he was from New Zealand or Australia. I think his name was Jerry. And he came up with the solid fuels that was the first project, a private venture project that Jan and Designex sold. And they sold this in 1958 or 7 to the United States Navy and the U.S. government, and was the beginning of the Polaris missile submarine. That was those fuels became the solid fuels in the Polaris missile system, which was the first stealth. This enabled submarines to fire underwater missiles that would go right up and into the atmosphere and go intercontinental while the submarine was moving, and this gave them stealth. And this was the introduction of the first, and led to speculation that if they could do this in the water, they could do it in the air with new materials and new designs. So it was a very interesting time at Designex, and the first success, I happen to know that they got paid on top of their costs a $6 million profit on that one. And private venture projects at Designex were seen as a great investment. Unfortunately, most people didn't know about it, but because my father had been the factor, he was invited to finance, to look at the other special projects that they were private venture projects. And the next one after the solid fuels project, which had been sold and was a done deal, was this zero fuel engine project. And the very name zero fuel engine, they told me, and later on I saw from the men at A.V.Roe, because the A.V.Roe contingent would come and there'd be the military component, and there would be the PhD engineers, aero engineers, and physicists, and so on. And the Exxon for some reason was there. The Exxon engineers were at A.V.Roe. They were living out there. They didn't come and go from Houston. They came and stayed for years. They watched all of this meticulously.
The zero fuel project, was that headed towards a flying craft originally, or?
They had the Silverbug craft was the T. Townsend Brown design. The electrodynamics were imported by T. Townsend Brown, and this other fellow that he had with him, whose name escapes me. He was working with Dr. Bert England and Ian Tawes, who had several master's degrees, and they used to say knew everything that there was to know about steam. He was from Scotland. Bert England was blue-eyed, 6'3", thin, very, very studious. These men they organized themselves as to who's the leader. It was easy to see straight away that Bert England was the intellectual. Bert and Jan Thomas were the intellectual leaders.
Jan was a powerhouse, and obviously to be in a position that he was in with the National Research Council and A.V.Roe, etc. His credentials were impeccable. I mean, the guy was way overqualified to do almost anything.
Yeah. Do you ever keep in touch with him after the project folded? And you did
Yeah,
another movie?
we did. I would see him occasionally. He loved to put on his big woolly sweater and go hiking in this ravine near his place and sort of pretending he was in Wales, I guess. And I'd stay in touch for a while. But he kind of fell off the radar a little bit. I think he was, I wouldn't say a broken man, but he was at the end of his rope, unfortunately. I think when the family collapsed around him, and I'm not being dramatic about that, am I? As a result of the pressures, I think that just capped it, and he kind of just dropped off my radar anyway. I'm sure Bill stayed in touch with him after the fact, but yeah, I can't say enough what a wonderful guy he was, and charismatic.
What did Austin? You say Austin?
Austin Willis.
Austin Willis. Did he take it and do anything with it, or was he able to?
I paid Austin Willis privately.
Oh, did you? Okay.
My dad and I had a meeting with the lawyers, and he got so much in advance from me, and he was to get the balance when it aired. By the time it aired, he was dead.
So that's why he was so cooperative. He got paid. Okay. I wondered. I thought he was a
No, he got
convert.
paid.
Good. But you know, initially when we went to his house to meet with him, and for me as a young Canadian boy, meeting this kind of, it would be like going to meet Walter Cronkite. You know, it was like pretty exciting. And within 10 minutes, he was sort of saying, yeah, I'm in. Like, when do we start? So he got it. He totally felt the urgency and the need to bring this out. And to attach a guy like that to it would be like having Walter Cronkite bring it to the public. So we were pretty excited.
When you filmed the piece with Yayan, who else was there doing the film?
Bill Doyle Jr., who we met. I think your father, Bill Sr., popped in once or twice. A few conscript crew members. I had a script girl, a continuity person, a gaffer, and so on and so forth.
Alan Hilton Tudhope was there.
That's right, Alan Tudhope. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, there was a group of supporters of Yayan that were coming and going. But you know, these things are pretty tedious, and it wears thin after a while. The excitement wears off and everybody wanders off. But really it was myself and Bill and our nuclear crew that hung around. And I don't think any of Yayan's family was there, Bill, as I recall.
They weren't.
No, so.
And you have had quite a career in the film business too.
Yeah, as they say, it took me 30 years to become an overnight success. I started at the lowliest of the low, set design, painting, so on and so forth, worked up through gripping, gaffing, assistant cameraman, assistant director, became a director cameraman, won a world's best at the Hollywood Radio and Television Society, which was pretty nice. Shifted into advertising and then gradually pulled out, and now I just paint because that's what I love to do. But yeah, no, I had a really good career in the film industry, and I guess some of which I learned my rudiments from doing projects like this one, just seat in my pants, much like you do, I think.
That's great. I don't really have anything else. Does anybody else?
The only thing I'd like to add is maybe just from my point of view, having met Yayan and seen and heard all of the endorsements and the people I met, I have absolutely no doubt that he either stumbled or galloped into something enormous, and unfortunately it kind of swallowed him. But I wish that it could be resurrected. And that's my personal thought.
Beautiful. And you did it. That was a nice piece you did with Yayan too. I'm glad you did it, because without that,
Lost to history.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that was I wasn't aware at the time of maybe how important it was, but in retrospect, as I said to Bill, I'm delighted that we have that document. Let him express himself.
If I may, let me try to put this into perspective, Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
A professional engineer has reported that the performance of your energy regain system
Yeah.
is contradictory to the second law of thermodynamics, right? Now, a senior engineer in charge of North American pipeline for a major oil company once called your system Perpetual Motion Plus. And the vice president of the largest manufacturer of compressors in North America states uncategorically that your system makes every piece of refrigeration equipment now in use obsolete. Well, to me, the question that remains is this: why has there not been a tremendous uproar in the scientific community?
There are so many questions surrounding the second law that no honest scientist can legitimately dismiss second law challenges out of hand anymore. It's intellectually untenable to do so. And it's now a political struggle to gain enough visibility and enough converts to get it actually examined carefully. Certainly a handful of scientists, maybe a couple dozen of us who are actually in the challenging business, could be squashed by the scientific community or more easily ignored. But I think ultimately people are going to have to come to grips with the second law, particularly if somebody comes up with a real challenge, a real violator experimentally. They're going to say, well, why does it work? They can't simply ignore that. I mean, it's one thing to ignore theory, it's another thing to ignore experiment. The laws of nature are not written on a wall anywhere. They're not written on the particles of nature, the atoms or the molecules. They are the invisible rules by which everything operates, apparently. And we have to infer what they are from our observations. They're human constructs about what the universe is doing. There is no definition of the second law. There are probably between a half a dozen and 24 definitions, depending on how you want to count them. Not all the statements of the second law are compatible with each other. Some are more popular than others. A law is an observation about the world. And it is true as long as it keeps being observed in the world. As soon as it stops being observed in the world, or as soon as you find an exception, then you can say that it is no longer a law or needs some sort of modification. Well, let me put it this way. God is an experimentalist. After all, he created the world. If he had been a theorist, he would have written down the equation only and gotten the sign wrong.